Can you hear it? The pulse of our region. It's starting to sound like progress. It's happening here, and there, all around us. We're gaining momentum and catalyzing change. But it doesn't happen on its own. We need each other. Every person, every business, every organization, we all play a role. We're leading. We're collaborating. We're growing. Yeah, we've had some wins, but we still have work to do. We're leveraging our assets, investing in innovation, and creating opportunities for everyone here to share in this momentum. The pulse of our region is strong, it's steady, it's rhythmic. Can you hear it? Can you see it? Are you a part of it? Every beat represents the commitment, the drive, the determination that is uniquely Akron. Our progress is palpable, but we've only just begun. We're gaining traction and building something powerful, something together, something greater.
Good morning, and welcome to this morning's Leadership Dialogue series, focused on the topic of digital transformation. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. Our presenting sponsors include Akron Children's Hospital, Browse McDowell, Huntington, KeyBank, Retzel, State and Federal Communications. And our premier sponsors are Cohen & Company, Goodyear, Great Work, Sikich, SummaCare, and Team Neo. Their investment and support allows us to bring important content like this morning's conversation to you free of charge. You know, the last year has defined and redefined so many things for people and for business, from the way and where we work to the heightened expectations we have as consumers to access goods and services on demand. Our society, our workplace, and culture will be forever changed at some level as a result of the pandemic. In many ways, few areas have changed more than those directly related to technology and digitization. As society and workplaces begin to reopen, I often hear people longing for things to go back to normal. But I think we have to caution ourselves on that. Disruptions change things permanently. They don't necessarily change everything that we do, but they are called disruptors for a reason. They disrupt large components of our lives, our systems, and our businesses. The pandemic was one of those, and in many cases, normal doesn't look a lot like it did before the pandemic. We've got to redefine our businesses to create them to operate the way we want them to for the future. Innovation, adaptability, and change are all core components to businesses' ability to remain competitive and to grow. And from a digital perspective, we must understand and embrace the digital world we live in and challenge ourselves to maximize it, to make us better on every level. With rapid digitization comes new opportunities, new markets, new lines of business. It also brings new investments, new risks, and the challenge of managing change for the people who keep our businesses running day to day. Being intentional about seeking opportunities for innovation while also remaining cognizant of the risks it presents is a pivotal balance for business success. And that's what we're here to talk about today. We have a panel of experts who bring very different ideas and perspectives to the table on the subject of digital transformation. While they're all unique, I think they can all agree that change is upon us. To introduce our panelists today, we have Laura Culp, partner with Sikich. Laura is on the Greater Akron Chamber Board of Directors and Executive Committee. She plays a key role in continuing to advance the growth and opportunities for businesses in this region. She brings a wealth of perspective in many areas and is steadfast in her commitment to ensure businesses are well positioned for success. With that, I'll turn it to you, Laura.
Thanks, Steve. I'm excited to be here this morning to introduce this impressive group of panelists. At Sikich, we are committed to advancing the growth and success of the clients we serve. In this age of rapid digitalization, technology is improving the way we do things in ways we could never have imagined. Thinking innovatively is critical for companies as they work to position themselves for success today and into the future, and Sickage is honored to be able to play a part in helping companies get there. Today's panelists bring with them a wide array of perspectives and experiences. From understanding the digital resources on the horizon and leveraging new technology for growth, to doubling down on the security of businesses and individuals on cyber platforms, there is so much to learn and discuss in this space, and it is imperative that companies have their digital strategies top of mind. With that, let's learn a bit more about our panelists this morning. First, we have Chris Geyer, CEO and Managing Partner of Sickage LLP. Sickage is a professional services company with technology at the core of its business model. In addition to leading the overall strategic and financial direction of the firm, Chris has spearheaded our push for innovation over the past 5 years. He's on the forefront of analyzing how technology will transform the professional services industry and how our organization can use it to improve efficiency, enhance client service, and embrace new and better models of work. Chris is focused on delivering the highest level of professional client service and creating a dynamic workplace where employees can be successful. Previously, Chris served as the partner in charge of advisory services and Sickage's investment banking team. Chris's leadership experience includes more than 25 years as an advisor and C-level executive in both private and publicly traded companies. He's also spent time in the public sector as an undercover police officer with the Phoenix Police Department. Chris lives in the Chicago area with his wife and 2 children. He enjoys flying as a licensed pilot as well as other physical activities, including scuba diving, motocross, skydiving, mountaineering, and bull and horseback riding. Next, please welcome Priya Merchant. Priya is a digital transformation and innovation expert with nearly 2 decades of experience in financial services and insurance with top global organizations across the US, UK, Canada, India, and Latam. With a passion for digital technologies and emerging trends, she works with businesses to build future-ready organizations, develop new capabilities, and foster a culture of innovation while driving significant business outcomes. She writes on the Entrepreneurial Leadership Network Contributor and has been published in Information Age, Insurance Thought Leadership, and Property Casualty 360. She is best known for writing about digital transformation subjects ranging from leadership and pivoting during the pandemic to practical advice on digital transformation trends, solutions, and strategies companies can adapt. Priya moved recently from New Jersey to Philadelphia with her husband, daughter, and their dog. She spends her free time practicing yoga, writing, and gardening. Finally, please welcome Randy Pargman, Vice President of Threat Hunting and Counterintelligence at Binary Defense. In this role, he leads the team responsible for advanced analysis of malware, development of technology to detect threat actor activity, threat intelligence research of criminal forums, and monitoring of darknet, clearnet, and social media platforms for threat indicators. Randy previously served for the FBI, where he served for 15 years, most recently as a senior computer scientist on the Cyber Task Force in Seattle. Randy is now frequently covered by national media outlets for his cybersecurity expertise. Randy lives in the Pacific Northwest, where he enjoys outdoor activities such as camping, hiking, and campfire cooking with his wife, 2 children, and their dog. He volunteers as a mentor and cybersecurity instructor and recently taught a class at Circle City Con 8.0 on how to build and operate a threat research lab without spending a lot of money. Today's panel will be moderated by Steve Millard, President and CEO of the Greater Akron Chamber. As a member of the Chamber's Board of Trustees, I can attest to the work the organization has done to adapt to this digital age by bringing programs like this to broad audiences in a virtual forum and by remaining committed to ensuring that the business community understands the most pertinent issues at hand. With that, I will turn it over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Laura. We appreciate you being here with us this morning. We appreciate you also taking the risk of introducing your boss, or your boss's boss maybe, and we appreciate your support for the program today. I'm looking forward to this conversation. We have assembled some really smart people, not to mention, and I don't know, Chris, maybe we can talk about this later, but I don't know how you go from being an undercover cop to the leader of one of the country's largest accounting and consulting firms, but that's probably a story for another day. But we really appreciate you all being with us today to share some of your insights and ideas as we talk about digital transformation, which I think has been one of those things that a number of us have been forced into. Some of us have thought about more strategically over time, but all of us, I think, understand the role of digital in our businesses much more today than we may have maybe 18 months ago. Also, neglected to say earlier on, but a shout out to our studio audience here today. We've got about, I don't know, 30 or so of our members with us who decided to take the hybrid option today. So they did some networking this morning, which I think was a lot of fun, and then are here to be a part of this presentation as well. So again, with that, let's get started here. So let's start with a little bit of level setting here. And let's just start maybe with Priya. Priya, you spend your time counseling, evangelizing, talking to people about digital transformation. Can you sort of start us off with just defining digital transformation, especially as it relates to companies and businesses?
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. So the way I define digital transformation is simple. It's just the adoption of digital tools and technologies into your business, whether it is in the the front end, communicating to your clients, the delivery, service delivery, or your operations, which is the middle, and then also in the back end, like we'll talk about all that. But I think that's a simple definition, something that is adding technology and you're adopting it throughout the value chain to meet or, whether it's a customer need or the market demand, right? But many times what people think digital transformation is, a big sort of a change in business model, or you're, investing very heavily in, you need a lot of investments, but that usually is more often than not the case, right? So it is really the incremental changes that you're doing to really start enhancing your value proposition. How can you do better for the customer? And that's really how I define digital transformation.
And that's helpful. It's sort of, it sounds like you're saying, don't think of it as just a big chunk you got to eat. Think of it as moving day to day. Chris, as you think about how companies are paying attention to this and how it's playing into growth and survival, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, Steve, yeah, thanks to the Chamber and to Priya and Randy. I look forward to and appreciate the opportunity to sit and talk with you guys today. Steve, for us, I read a recent article by McKinsey, and it was a survey that surveyed, I think it was 500 CEOs, and they said basically that the results were essentially that only 11% of CEOs thought that the business model they have today would be the same in 2023. Wow. So, I mean, that's a heavy statement. And so for people like me in the roles that I'm in, I think about that, and it's all about relevance and competitiveness. And so as Priya said, as we look at transformation strategies within Sikich, and as we talk about those strategies with our clients, we think about relevance and competitiveness. And so, we're looking to create better systems throughout the organization, whether it's across technology or process or client engagement, and the use of technology and leveraging technology, to improve those areas of the business. So we see it as a huge opportunity, frankly, because if there's a lot of folks out there and companies that won't be moving as quickly as others will, that's an opportunity for big change.
I can't imagine companies not sort of moving, knowing they have to move quickly on this. You talk about opportunity, but Randy, there's also maybe risk as well. So you're sort of spend your day watching all the bad stuff that goes on out there in this space. What are some of the risks that companies need to be thinking about as they move in this direction?
I wish that it were not the case, but it is true that anytime that a business leader builds something that is doing really well and that is succeeding, there are always people that would like to take advantage of that to steal it, right? The
Right.
same thing is true in the physical world. If you have a prosperous business that people rolling by on the street might see it as an opportunity to lift some items for free or to take some money out of the safe. In the online world, the bigger the business presence online, the more great digital transformations that company has done to make them accessible also makes them a potential target for people who would like to break in and steal some things. Just late last night, in fact, my team, as they were monitoring Russian language forums, found somebody advertising that they had broken in and had access to a company in Northeast Ohio. So one of my team members is over there this morning, just letting them know, not to start business, just to let them know, hey, we found this as we were looking for other stuff. As a good neighbor, we want to just share that information with you so that you can stop it before they do some ransomware or something.
So if one of our attendees today gets a knock on the door from a guy with a binary defense shirt, unfortunately, that's you, right?
Yeah.
In terms of what you're saying. But I mean, I think, and we're hearing a lot about sort of ransomware and cyber attacks and those kinds of things. Any maybe 15, 20 seconds on how common is it for companies? I've heard that some people have said you've either been hacked or you either know you've been hacked or you don't know yet. Is that sort of accurate at this point?
I'd say it is very common for companies to have cybersecurity problems that they're not aware of until the hammer drops and the FBI comes in and says, you know what, we've detected that you've been the victim of a computer intrusion for some months, or until the attacker locks up all the computers and sends you a ransom note saying we'd like, $10 million so that you can get your company back in business.
Yeah, and I think our awareness has been lifted so much over the last year in this, based on the news and everything else that's going on. As you think about the impact of the pandemic, and I know that, we're at a point where, we have to start thinking about how much more do we talk about the pandemic, I know, but it's something that has accelerated change. It's accelerated the way in which people are thinking about digital. Chris, as you talk about with companies about this, what's your sense of how much this has moved companies that would have not moved before, or how much it's accelerated the change that you're seeing companies go through right now?
Yeah, we had an old term back in my law enforcement days. It was exigent circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that that's this, right? We're talking about sort of during the pandemic, a very pressing, demanding period of time. And I think the pandemic created what I call within SICK, a forcing function, as we talked before, Steve. And what does that really mean? It just means that although we were in the process of a number of different transformational strategies across our business, this just really accelerated the pace by which we felt we needed to change. And so, and I think that was actually a helpful thing, because it probably took some of the initiatives that we were involved with pre-pandemic and just put a much faster completion timeframe there. And frankly, as a leader who's constantly trying to communicate our vision around these changes and why we're doing all these things, which I think is hugely important, is that it just was a way for me to sort of blame it on the pandemic and say, no, this is change that has to happen. We can't take 2 years to make this happen. We have 2 days to make this happen, right? And thankfully for us that we had made some significant investments in technology pre-pandemic, not because we're geniuses, just knew that we needed to move more in the direction of leveraging technology and got cloud-based and those sorts of things. So it was relatively easy for us when the pandemic came and hit, and as states began to shut down, it was a little bit easier for us to transition to more of this remote work world, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit later. But I think if it was the ability then for us to use the pandemic as, again, a forcing function to accelerate things that we had in process already. And I think a lot of companies did that. We saw that as we talked to our clients about what they're doing and the things that they're going to need to do to continue to stay relevant during the pandemic. And I think it was looking to make lemonade out of lemons, that I think it was a good thing in a lot of ways, that was that forcing function that forced a lot of companies to face reality maybe a little faster than they would have otherwise.
So Chris, in talking with you a little bit and just seeing what Sikich has done in some of these different areas, you're not the typical, I hope you don't mind, post, 45-year-old CEO of a company. And so you're already thinking about some of these things, but even in your situation as a leader, what surprised you about what your teams could do or what you could try in this time, given the circumstances?
Steve, that's a great question, and it's at the heart of not only our business as professional service, because our inventory is really the hours and the time that our people can work. But what I say all the time is, you can only affect things that happen around you to a certain extent, right? And sometimes you can't affect it at all. But
Right.
the thing that I preach all the time about is, and I do it even with my kids, is that the thing you can control is how you respond to them and how you feel about them and the attitude that you bring to work with you every day, wherever that is and whatever that means. Okay. So that was probably the thing that as a leader, I felt the most excited about, was the way I saw our people respond. Right. And I love that video you guys did, by the way, in the beginning there, Steve. And I know you're not going to take credit for that, and you shouldn't probably, but what a great video that was, because it's just so true about the people. And I think times like this, challenging times, I thrive on those, because it gives everyone an opportunity to really see what they're made of. And within our organization, and we have a very strong human capital team, but our people really responded really well. And I think it gave them opportunities to say, oh, okay, this is kind of weird. We don't know what's going to happen. We got this workplace life integration thing going on. And then we still have the danger of a pandemic that, can be harmful to me and my family and my relatives and whatnot. And so you took all those things and put them together. And those, for some people, frankly, more so than others, were very challenging circumstances. And to see the way that our people responded, and many of our clients in the way that they responded, again, I think this was an opportunity for people to kind of see what they were made of. And a lot of people probably performed better than they actually thought they would.
Right.
And that's a takeaway that I think for a lot of companies, and I meet with a lot of leaders of our clients, those other CEOs, and I think that's a huge takeaway for them, is that their people were able to learn something about themselves that they may not have otherwise learned without a challenge like the pandemic.
I've seen, as I've talked to leaders of companies in our region, I've seen a lot of pride from them in terms of what their people were able to accomplish and do, what their IT folks were able to do in a short period of time. So I think that resonates. Priya, as you think about changes or what surprised you as a sort of a marketer, as a consultant in this space, et cetera, what do we know that's different about customer expectations coming out of this that plays into digital transformation?
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. So I think I second what Chris said, right? A lot of people had to manage a lot of change. All of us had never, companies had never really experienced something like that, right? And the pace of change was like pretty much overnight. So we all had dramatic shifts happen. And I think that really led to changing in our habits. And I would say, if you know about the 21-90 rule, which is, it takes 21 days to sort of form habits, but then 90 days to actually make them permanent. So absolute change happens by then, supposedly. But then right now we've been in almost 15 to 16 months of, pandemic, and we're sort of starting to come back now. What that has done is really change some of the buying behaviors, changed how we, consume and buy stuff and are expecting services. Even if you take yourself, there are a lot of things in our day-to-day life that has changed. And that's what's really causing companies to rethink about how are things going to be in, and I know it's a very commonly used word, the new normal, right? How are things going to really solidify? And Steve, even you said, people are going to need something that's hybrid, right? Because people had different levels of how they were expecting things. Some people were better at the digital adoption, others were not. So there's going to be a little bit of a mix of both the worlds, what was before and what was, in the last few a year plus. And that's going to continue for some time. So the customer expectation, bottom line, they've changed. People expect personalized online experience. They expect better delivery. They expect virtual. They expect, channels that they prefer. Some people are like phones. Some people like something else. And, these things are going to stay for a while.
It's interesting. One of the statistics I've heard along the way, and maybe others have too, is that during the pandemic, I think I've heard it 75% of people tried a new brand or a new experience because it could deliver differently than their old brand did, with, faster delivery, et cetera. And that 85% of people will stick with that brand going forward. I mean, that's a monumental thing for companies to get their hands around.
Yeah, absolutely agree on that. Yep.
So one of the other things that people expect now, Randy, is, and we're seeing this right now with employers as they try to hire people. There are folks who aren't interested in working if they don't have the option to work remotely. But we know that remote work has also exposed companies to things that are more difficult for their companies. Can you talk a little about how remote work has impacted the way companies are protecting themselves, the security of their information and their resources?
Yeah, I think this was at the top of mind of a lot of business leaders because most businesses had some form of remote access for some employees, the road warriors or the people who needed to access certain things at certain times, but it wasn't a big deal. And then they had to all of a sudden expand that to their entire workforce with very little planning. IT teams were under a lot of stress because of that. So at the beginning of the pandemic, there were actually a lot of problems just because the IT teams that normally would support all sorts of functions were just busy. Their hands were tied trying to not only set up these new systems with higher capacity, but help all the employees to learn how to use them and troubleshoot all of their problems. Now we've kind of settled into, hey, this is normal. We know how to support this. We've got the technology in place. So there's more of a longer tail of risk associated with the very fact that people have remote access at all and that so many people have that. The number one way that attackers are getting into businesses to launch ransomware or steal information or cause a lot of damage is actually through these employee remote access portals. And the risk multiplies by the number of employees and their choices with passwords and the way that they get into the systems. So there are a number of different options when you set up a virtual private network or a remote access facility, and the options are not really clear. They're all marketed as the top of the line, best of breed solutions, right? And they're usually focusing on the ease of use. How easy is it for your employees to get in remotely? That's definitely an appealing thing for employees, but it's very appealing for attackers too. If the only thing standing between someone in Russia and complete inside access to your business's network with the ability to do anything they want is one employee's password that they picked themselves, that is a very risky situation. I've found that practically it is impossible to expect human beings to pick good passwords. You just have to count on the fact that people are going to pick bad passwords. And when you multiply that by the number of employees who have remote access, that's your chance of having a very weak password that they've used for everything else. Just to give an example with the Colonial Pipeline, which I think a lot of people are aware of that ransomware attack because it affected gas prices and lines at the pump across the whole East Coast. That came about as a result of one employee using the same password to access the VPN for Colonial Pipeline as they did for some other account that they use, like a Shoppers Club or something like that. When one password is exposed, and I see millions of passwords exposed on the dark web every single day. When one password is exposed, you can bet that people around the world with ill intent are going to try that password everywhere they can. And those remote access things like the VPN or remote desktop, those are really obvious on the internet. You might think that you've hidden it, that nobody's going to know that IP address, but there are whole search engines whose entire purpose is to find those and make them easy for anyone in the world to identify them. So there's really no such thing as, hiding the key under the mat and hoping that nobody will get in. If the key is there, somebody will try it.
It's interesting because you talk about like that simple concept, and I'm guessing a lot of folks who are watching this understand that passwords are never secure, right? They're available out there and those kinds of things. But I guess, Chris, one of the things we talked about when we talked prior to this was, the knowledge barriers so many of our leaders have relative to technology and digital strategies. And this whole idea of, if you don't understand what's underneath something, or what's, that simple thing that Randy just laid out there, that having the same password across 10, 15 things or whatever is a major vulnerability. It's hard to sort of figure out how to overcome these things. How are you advising CEOs and others about how to not only embrace change, but continue to sort of take risks and sort of learn about these digital transformation opportunities to get to the benefits? How do you coach folks through that?
Well, I would tell you that as we talked earlier, it's all about people.
Yeah.
And so you have to have really talented people if you're going to talk about transforming anything. And so, leaders oftentimes are intimidated by, and people in general, I suppose, they're intimidated by things they don't understand.
Yep.
And so instead of sort of opening themselves up and saying, listen, I don't understand this, we need to go find really smart people that do understand it, they tend to sort of withdraw and kind of, that protectionism mechanism kind of kicks in. It's like, well, I don't really understand a whole lot of this, so I'm going to kind of put my head in the sand a little bit. And there's some other issues economically, it costs too much money to digitally transform our business and all those other sorts of things. But I think at the CEO level, and the conversations that I have with others, is they don't understand it. They don't understand what digital really is and what it means, and whether that's the positives from digital and to Randy's point, all the negatives. So it's easier to do nothing. Right. So my running back coach in college used to say, listen, we can't have you standing around doing nothing. Do something, even if it's not right. That's what he used to say. And that's kind of the way I talk to other CEOs about this, is you need to be bold. Just because you don't understand it doesn't mean you shouldn't do something about it. Right. So don't be intimidated by things you don't know. Go out and find experts that do know about process, about people, about technology, and assemble that team, and have that team, with your vision of outcomes, go and actually execute around process in the organization. So be bold. That's probably the number one thing.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think you underlined something there. It's about, if you've got people who understand where you're trying to go and what you're trying to get done, that gives them a lot more room to innovate and try things, even without knowing exactly what they should be doing, because they know what the end goal is. But, for any of you, I mean, a lot of the folks who are listening to this might be small, mid-sized businesses where they don't have a team that they can sort of put on these things. And they've got to figure out ways to do some of this stuff themselves. How do you think about, business owners can stay up to date and generally continue their own education and experimentation in this space? Any thoughts on resources for them, from any of you?
I do have a thought on the security side. For small businesses, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, actually has published an outstanding guide for self-education that is very approachable and is specifically aimed at small businesses. I'd be happy to share that link, and maybe we can send that out to participants.
Yeah, if you want to, shoot us that link, and we can drop it in the chat, in the chat, or have it afterwards for folks as well. Priya, any thoughts that you have on that?
Yeah, and I would say that, necessity is sort of the mother of invention, right? Like the
Right.
very common use saying, but like I had folks who didn't know how to use Zoom. I mean, Zoom is usable, but there were lots of different features. Like I, in personal life, had to, we just got together and learned it together. Like I was using it at work, but then we were trying to use it for, religious gathering. But then having 50 people on Zoom, we wanted to have smaller groups. So people didn't know how to do breakout rooms and things like that. That's just one example, right? But I think when when people, have to learn something. Like this was a situation where you were forced to learn something, forced to reinvent. You just had to go out there and just ask people, right? Okay, how are you doing it? Can you help me do it? Ask your friends. And I think Steve, your organization is, I must say, amazing, right? So you've been that central group that people could come talk to you, network within industry, cross industry. I think that's really important. And I definitely saw that happening. So that collaboration among people, if somebody was doing something better, why not sort of just adopt it? So I think that would be my advice, that just sort of lose the fear, just go out there and just do it.
Are there rules of thumb, Priya, as you talk to some of these small, mid-sized companies on how far to go in terms of investment and value here, right? I mean, if you've got a more modest budget and you don't have the ability to sort of just splash money out there on these things, is there some sense of what you can expect back from technology investors, some way to evaluate how far do I go? Because a lot of us were just trying stuff, right? And I remember early in the pandemic, I got a quote to sort of equip our conference space, I think, with cameras, and it was like 35 grand. And then I found something else for like $1,500 that seems to work just as well. Like, how do you know how far to go on these things?
Yeah, so I would say that, money, this in this current economic situation, right? Everybody wants to be careful about money, and we are expected to do more with less. So if you are faced, in the current situation, my advice would be, evaluate your current situation and needs, because sometimes, less is more. Simple things will serve the purpose. So just as in your case, Steve, right? So the budget, evaluating your situation first, whether you have a lot of money, you want the best of breed, or you're in the situation where you could take some initial investments, get that working, but at a later stage, try to upgrade that. For another business, it might be that the pandemic was led to a lot of growth. So you're in the situation where you're trying to scale, right? There were many businesses which did sort of scale.
Mhm.
In that situation, you're trying to find something that is scalable, and you're trying to maximize your budget on one or few particular technologies that will help you do that. I mean, definitely security comes to mind, right?
Sure.
You needed that. It was sort of needed, and there were a couple of other things that were helping. So that's one part of it. The second is, you really have to start looking at focusing on certain projects. And I would say, they fall under a few categories. One is either they're improving your efficiency, you're helping you sort of grow, or you're developing better products, services, customer experience, that category. So really prioritizing your products, doing what is needed. And my third point would be that there are many creative ways to manage your budget and your funds, right? So as you said, rather than the upfront investments, you're looking at usage-based products or usage-based services, which probably is what you signed up for a conference. So you're taking the licenses that you need for a few people versus, buying and wholesale upfront investment on certain technologies. And then also I think vendors have become, I would say, open to having creative commercial models, right? So you have people, at least in the work that I do, we sort of have outcome-based pricing, which is something that is coming up. We have things like, okay, we will do X, and we will be able to fund this through the savings that we bring about. So those are a couple of options that can be explored, and people are very open to sort of doing that these days.
So when you're looking at some of these things, right, you're looking at the perspective of what do I get back on my investment? But Randy, in your space, I think about what you do in cybersecurity a lot like maybe workers' comp, right? We talk to companies about, workers' comp and how you save money on workers' comp and the need for workers' comp. And nobody really values it until after somebody has fallen off a ladder and broken a leg, and then they realize what the value is. I think in your space, it's even more consequential because it's expensive to sort of secure yourself at some level against cyber threats. But my sense is that, the way in which these folks are activating on ransomware and stuff like that, I mean, they're killing companies with this who I'm sure are saying I could have spent a little bit up front. How do you think about the cost of inaction in this space, in the cyberspace?
I think of the cost of inaction more of a risk than a cost. If you aren't taking any action at all, then it's not costing you anything until it does, right? Until
Right.
somebody breaks in and causes some harm. But I want to approach this more as the way to think about costs in a smart way as you're thinking about what to invest in, right? Because at some point you need to make a decision. What am I going to do about security? Just like you need to make a decision about whether you're going to lock your doors at night of your business location, just like you need to make a decision if you're going to have alarms on your windows and if they're going to be monitored or not. And failure to make a decision is a decision itself. You're accepting the consequences of what might happen. You're taking some risk to save some money, and then you're gambling on whether that's going to be a smart risk or not. But I also want to point out that it's not an all or nothing approach, right? Just like evaluating your other risks, you need to look at and do a little bit of research about what is most likely to happen to my business and spend the money that you need to on the things that are most likely to occur. Manage that risk and mitigate that risk that you need to. And then don't let the vendors drive the discussion about what you need to mitigate, because you as a business owner are going to know with a little bit of research a lot more about what sort of threats you need to defend against. And, I'm sure if a vendor came and told you that you need a very expensive product that they sell to defend against laser sharks, that might sound very scary and convincing. And you might think, what am I going to do when the laser sharks come? But if you think about it a little bit, that's just not going to happen, right? That's very unlikely. Or let's say, putting it more in the real world, somebody said you need, insurance against terrorists taking all of your employees hostage, with machine guns. That would be horrible if it happened, but very unlikely to, right? So think about the things that actually are happening. Talk to other people in businesses like yours and find out what are the risks that are actually happening and what are the straightforward things that you can do. Some of those don't cost very much at all. And with the services that we were just talking about, that Priya was mentioning, like outcome-based things, talk to people about how you can pay for a service that is going to mitigate just the risks that you actually care about, the things that you think are more likely to happen, and base the cost on the protection that you're getting against those risks.
So Randy, make this sort of practical. Take this a level down for me, okay? So if I'm a small, mid-sized business, I'm sure our large businesses, they've got folks that think about this all day long, right? But if you're a small or mid-sized business, what is it that you absolutely got to make sure that you're guarding against right now?
Okay, so there are actually some very simple and straightforward things. I mentioned earlier that the number one way that attackers are getting in successfully and launching the ransomware is through remote access portals. So take a hard look at those remote access portals that you've got. If you don't understand what the risks are, ask somebody or hire somebody to do an assessment of those and tell you how easy would it be to break in. A very simple way to evaluate it. If the only thing that is required for someone to log in is a username and password, that's not enough. If you can enable multi-factor authentication where you get the code on your phone, it's a little bit inconvenient. It's just like having to reach into your pocket to get your keys to open up that locked door. But it's important to have locked the door, right? You get used to those little inconveniences. And that is a huge improvement that you can make that's not going to cost you a whole lot of money. It's just, usually it's just turning some feature on that you already had that maybe you just hadn't thought about how important it was. Another way that people get in very frequently is through email. Sending email to employees that have an attachment or a link or a phone number that they're supposed to call. That's one of the latest ones that's been very effective. Employees call the phone number thinking that there's something important going on, and the person on the other end of the phone talks them through downloading and installing some malware that gives them a backdoor. These are also things that you can defend against with some email scanning. There's products and services that are available that you can buy or lease that protect your email from almost all of those threats, right? And you need to do some research and find out what service would be most useful. So those are really straightforward things. They're not really high-tech solutions. They're not all that difficult. And then going a step beyond that, a company like Binary Defense or another that does monitoring, that outsources that problem, that you basically just have to install the software on all the machines, and then there's somebody 24 hours a day, 7 days a week that's watching for threats. That's a very easy way to go again and mitigate against a lot of potential threats.
So, you know, I mean, I think one of the things that I've heard in this space is just if the, as you said earlier, if the burglar is walking down the street and he walks by 3 businesses and one has the doors open and the other 2 don't, the guy with the doors open is in trouble. So just these basic steps, as you say, making it just a little bit hard helps your companies a bit. Chris, let's talk practically about how you see some of these digital transformation strategies working with companies. You are doing some really interesting things right now at Sickit, which with bots and automation. Can you talk a little bit about the how you're actually using some of this stuff in your business?
Yeah, you bet, Steve. And I just want to make one comment about, you know, Randy's talking about sort of the other side of that from a digital and from a transformation perspective is within your business model itself where disruption can happen. It's not necessarily a security related disruption. So I want folks to walk away thinking, you know, that the digital transformation is all about security. It is. There's no question about that. Security of your data. There's no doubt about that. But I think the other thing you got to really look at is you have to look at your business model and you have to see where there are vulnerabilities for disruption within your value chain, your value equation, right? Because I think that's where firms, even as Randy indicated about, well, what's the probability of this or that or the other thing and managing to that risk, there's a high likelihood that your business model will be disrupted by a competitor because of technology. That much I can just tell you. And in our business, we see it. It happens every day. We see it in our clients' businesses. And the fact that they aren't in a position necessarily to employ certain technology and automation for the sake of leverage, whether it's for client relationships or their supply chain or whatever it is, they run the risk of being disrupted. So one of the things I tell our folks all the time is that, you know what, we want to be in a position where we identify our vulnerabilities in our business model and disrupt ourselves before somebody else does, because it's going to happen. It's happening every single solitary day. So to your question, you know, Steve, about automation, you know, I'm a big believer in whatever's repeatable is automatable. So if you've got a process in your business that's repeatable over and over and over and over, we can automate that. Okay, so a couple of years ago, we went down this path of deciding whether or not we wanted to set up infrastructure in a foreign country where labor rates are lower versus saying, no, we think that technology is going to be in a place where we can use automation and we can use tools instead of making investments in infrastructure and people, you know, offshore. So that was the direction that Sickit has gone. And I would tell you that it's making a huge difference for us. But I tell you a funny little story is we were talking about these bots, and we have 2 of them, by the way. And our IT guys named them, and they can do, you know, I'm not in the sausage making, but they can do plethora of things, and they are already today. But they've named them. Willow the bot is one of them, and the other one is Easton Botsway. So they're funny names, but they've got these bots doing all kinds of things. So anyway, we were sitting around leadership circle team one day a couple of years ago talking about it. And one of our senior level partners said, hey, he said, so I don't know, you know, we're pretty tight in you know, this office space over there. So where are these bots going to sit? Where are they going to be? Like, where are we going to store them? It was the funniest thing. But again, that back to my earlier point about in the conversation about a lack of understanding, right? And being intimidated by that. And because of that, doing nothing, right? So we have
Very
bots.
good. The good thing is he asked the question, right? Three others were thinking it, but at least he was courageous enough to ask you the question.
Yeah, that's a good point. You're probably
Right,
absolutely right about that. That's absolutely right. So we have bots internally doing all sorts of repeatable things.
Like what, Chris? Give me an example
So
of
like they do bank recs,
okay.
right? They set up all the AP. They do all the AR. They do a number of functions with respect to onboarding. So even as it relates to onboarding employees, we have bots that are doing probably 90% of the process and all of the things, paperwork, benefits, 401k, all that stuff that has to get done for onboarding people with a bot.
So, and these things are, and just because I'm trying to give this some definition and dimension for folks who may not be familiar, but the process where, let's take onboarding, for example, right?
Yeah.
We send somebody their offer letter and they get it back to us. Then we send their benefits information and they enroll in that. So all that back and forth is happening in an automated fashion for your people.
That's right.
Okay, interesting.
That's one example, right? Bank recs are another one that's a simple example. Anybody that is involved in business probably understands, right? The bots do our bank recs. They bank rec daily, actually. And the thing that's good about bots is, as they don't ever get tired. They don't ever have a bad attitude one day. They don't ever catch a cold and get the flu so and listen, the question that always comes up, is, well, you guys are introducing all of this technology and all this automation, which is leverage, and professional services particularly is all about leverage, right? To be profitable. Well, what are you going to do with all these people then that'll be out of jobs? And I'm telling you, and in every business we've ever talked to or advised about automation, that's never the case. It's all about, we need people doing things of higher value. And so if you've been doing a repeatable process, we don't want you to do that anymore, right? We want to upskill your thought process and your value equation to the business. Well, can everybody do that? No, but that's the concept. And so we haven't let anybody go. We don't terminate people when we install automation. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's quite the opposite. So yeah, we're excited about it and deploying it into other professional services firms where we've got process similarity and taking it out to our clients. And there'll be far more of that in the future quickly, is what I would tell you.
I think as these things go, right, as you perfect this and others, it becomes more and more affordable to move more and more to downstream smaller businesses.
Right.
We've been having this big conversations. Obviously, everybody's talking about workforce right now. And we've actually been talking to some manufacturers who can't find people or can't get people to work for, what they had paid before. Forget about the people side. How do you automate these processes? And Ethan Karp, who leads Magnet in our region, will tell you that we've had huge productivity gains in our region. It's not been at the expense of people and jobs. Those people have been able to move to a next level job. So that sort of, I think, parallels what you're saying, Chris. So Priya, what kind of tools and resources do you think about for folks who want to get to the next level here? Are there some specific tools they should be learning more about?
So yeah, Steve. So I think based on the type of business, Chris talked about understanding what is really needed, what is the market doing. So I would say look at some of those factors and decide what is needed. I mean, a couple of things I'll give as example, right? So I definitely saw a lot of technology being applied in the the interaction with your clients. So whether it was digital communication, e-signature, CRMs, where we can actually understand the client and the customer base better. So those were a couple of technologies I would say was everybody was sort of wanting to get better at doing it, or if they had a data, they were trying to make it more usable. So those were a couple of things. But then just generally, I would say that the technologies that, most likely people already have because of the need to work virtually, some of them were just sort of collaboration tools, right? So how do you make collaboration really and remote working very secure and scalable so that you're not having bandwidth issues, you're not sort of exchanging files over emails, but really have a secure place to store them. So technologies like that, like we are using Teams, Slack, things that you could sort of, initially you could just draw on the board if you had to explain a concept or you had to draw something and explain something, but that changed, right? So how do you, if you are in a creative business or in some other type of business where you have to show people something or show diagrams, how do you do that? So there are many tools that enable you to do that. And essentially just sort of tools that helped you work in a different manner, right? So I think that happened. Like, how do you manage and track stuff? So a lot of project management, smaller projects, keeping track of stuff. And from a technology perspective, I would say the biggest investment that people are making besides security is like data and insights, right? So people knew things were happening, they could develop reports, but I think the need during this time was getting more real-time information. So whether it was, understanding your sales, understanding your cost, understanding your finances, all that became sort of, you didn't have time to sort of wait till month, year end or like quarter end, things like that. People were wanting it faster. That is driving a lot of investment in how can you have better reporting, better insights, and data and analytics.
One of the things, a couple of things that I've noticed when you talk about those repeatable processes, or as Chris talked about that, if you all think just in your business, what's repeatable every day, a couple of things for me that I've sort of, the e-signature piece, I had never thought about trying to move our documents to e-sig. And then we did this big grant program for small businesses and we had 3,000 grants we had to deal with. And we did them all with e-sig. And I was amazed at how easy that was to do and how well integrated it was with other tools. QR codes seem like they're back now, right? They were gone for a while and now all of a sudden they're back because we need them for our menus. And then even just calendaring, like all of us trying to connect with each other, for me, meetings are a repeatable thing. So using tools like Calendly, right? Where my schedule is available to people and they can just go and pick their own time. So I think like there's all these little things that are very accessible and I don't think any of those things really cost anything, right? They're kind of free and available.
Yep, totally agree on that. Yep.
So as you think about this, Randy, we talk about like innovating and what's next. I'm scared to death as to what I sort of see in this sort of cyber area and what's happening. How are you seeing cyber criminals innovate their businesses to keep up with how we're learning to respond to them?
I'd say the good news for all of us in the business space is that for the most part, the cyber criminals are doing a lot of the same things. They're doing the things that have worked for a long time. There are a handful of them who are innovating and who are driving the process to break into those really secure mega corporations, those ones that have, a security team of hundreds around the clock, around the globe, constantly monitoring their systems. Those are the kind of things that criminals need to innovate. And one of the things that drives that ability to innovate is actually the money, the revenue that the criminals are bringing in, the illicit revenue from companies that are paying them ransoms of millions of dollars. Mm-hmm. It is quite impressive to me that a small-ish group of people, maybe a dozen or so people in Eastern Europe or somewhere in the world that doesn't really have a whole lot of other opportunities, can make $100 million from ransoms in a couple of months from companies that are willing to pay them. That kind of money then buys the talent that they need to innovate. But even though that sounds really scary, and it should be something that, as a whole of society, we should be thinking about whether we should even be, paying these ransoms and driving that innovation that makes life harder for all of us. I want to just bring a little bit of encouragement that when I see cyber criminals trying to break into companies, they're still going for the low-hanging fruit. They're still usually going after the things that are easy for them, because at the end of the day, criminals are lazy. They are not trying to be the best criminals that they possibly can be. They're trying to make the most money with the least amount of effort on their part. And I've seen them give up many times when they're thwarted by people just following best practices and doing kind of reasonable things to secure. So I think in the cybersecurity space, it is easy to get spun up on fear and worrying about, how do I defend against these world-class hackers? How can I possibly, compete against criminals with this kind of sophistication? But the real answer is still just back to basics. Do what you can. Invest in some free or low cost alternatives. Follow the things that people are recommending. And that is not necessarily something that's impossible. I think sometimes both in digital transformation and in security, we can get decision lock where we're just too concerned about how big the problem seems to be. And what we need to do is just take a step back and say, okay, what can I solve? What piece of this can I chip away and I can be done with that and do those things that you can do. And it's surprising, but from my perspective, that actually works a lot of the time.
It's interesting the way in which business models are also adapting here. You talked about, and I think maybe Randy has an idea for you, Chris. There, maybe there's a Sickich bot that could sort of reconcile ransomware payments. I don't know. I mean, maybe we don't want to do that, but could be an opportunity area. But you think about the opportunities that come out of some of this transformation. I've noticed a lot more companies with business models focused around doing a piece of somebody's business. I think about some of the HR services or some of the services around, it used to be the rare to have the Ruby receptionist or whatever the brand name is, right? Where you can have somebody be remote and be your receptionist, or you can outsource pieces of your business. Chris, are you seeing a lot of that activity where people are now more willing to think about breaking these things off because they've worked for a year or so virtually?
Yeah, it's funny because obviously the virtual work environment has been around for a number of years, but certainly not to the extent that it is now. I would say, and we can talk about that here later, but certainly there are entire industries that are cropping up around pieces of business process and that can be outsourced.
Mhm.
And so that doesn't happen really without technology, for the most part. So, that's something, again, that's back to what I said before about, looking at your business model and your revenue model and your profit structures, and diving as deep as you possibly can into, how can what we have in place today, how can that be disrupted?
Yep.
And so to your point, even something as simple as a recent investment that one of Bezos' venture capital fund made into an accounting, a company that does books and records and accounting for small businesses, put a $1.2 billion valuation on it for things that I say to our accountants that they've been doing for decades, right? But what are they doing? Oh, well, they're putting pieces of technology in place, right, that make the user and the customer client experience easier, right, and less expensive at the end of the day, that they can scale. So a platform like that they can scale. And so you drive big valuation. So we're seeing pieces of that depending on the industry, some more than in others, but pieces of the business going to outsourced companies, outsourcing because of the use of technology. And that's a prime example of looking at your business model and finding out if you do some of that, right, in a way that's not as efficient as the way that other company is going to do it, you're going to lose that piece of business, and that part of your value chain gets diminished.
So as we think about how things evolve, how do artificial intelligence and things like machine learning, how are they working to make critical services like cybersecurity more affordable and otherwise accessible to small business owners? Randy, maybe I'll start with you on that.
I'd say that artificial intelligence and machine learning are really in the digital online space, doing the same thing that bots are doing in the physical workspace, right? They're taking things that a computer is able to do and then relieving the human being, the knowledge worker, from those more menial tasks to be able to do higher level thinking and higher level tasks. So most of the way that I see machine learning being applied is to look at the patterns, patterns that aren't so obvious, that isn't, it might not be something that you look at it and it's, 1 0 1 0 1 0. That's an obvious pattern, but machine learning is able to see patterns that humans might not be able to recognize right away,
Right.
and then categorize things so that the human knowledge workers can deal with the things that are the most important. And that reduces the overall cost of staff, the number of people that have to be employed, the number of skilled people that are able to do things, but or that are required to do things. But there's another way to reduce costs there too, and that is by hiring a service or somebody that can share those costs across lots of different companies. If you've got any sort of task like that digital receptionist or like a security analyst who's monitoring signals, if you hire that person, full time, just working for your company, you've got to pay their benefits and your full time salary, the cost of recruiting, all of the overhead that's associated with that. But if you look more to a service based approach and outsource those things that you can, because of the digital transformation that so many companies have been doing, there is an ability to look well beyond your local neighborhood and just the people that you might know personally, and find the best value, find the best fit, somebody to provide the service that you need for your company.
So I think about how that works, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, many of us had our own sort of office-based servers for computers. Now, a lot of us are on the cloud, just a nice way of leveraging those costs. I've got some questions. If you have questions for our panelists, drop them into the chat and we'll get to them. I've got a list of questions here I'm going to jump into in our last 15 minutes here or so. But as our economy, one of our questions here is our economy's increasing resilience on workers with significant technology skills is going to amplify the importance of bridging the digital divide that we see disproportionately excluding our Black population. Do you see any companies being proactive in developing tech talent to ensure a diverse workforce? That's for anybody who's got some knowledge about what's happening with diversity and tech talent.
I'll start with this. So I've actually seen a lot of very positive and encouraging growth in providing education and opportunities for people to learn the skills. If you think about it, that is really the first step. There are a lot of people out there who have the ability to learn and who can adapt to the changing requirements of businesses, but they need somebody to provide them with that education. And it had been, especially in the cybersecurity space, but even in technology in general, that the barrier was really around cost, that there were very, very expensive programs and not a whole lot of things that were available at low cost. One of the things that I've seen that's been really encouraging is I have sought to find the best workers to do the things that we need, the more high-tech skills and the critical thinking skills. I've seen some organizations spring up that provide low or no cost training to people who are interested in it and who specifically are looking to make sure that that is available to underrepresented communities. So part of the way that works is through volunteers. That's one of the things that I've been doing is volunteer time to give talks and to do practical training for people, to share knowledge, to help people skill up. And it is really, really cool to see how people grab onto that chance, especially when they haven't had it before or they recognize the value that they're getting. And really, whenever an individual values something well enough that they're going to put all of their attention and their effort into it, they're going to learn a lot really fast. So having one of the practical ways that I've been exercising this is having an internship program that requires no particular education, that requires no particular credentials or certifications, but just some knowledge and ability to learn. Those kind of internship programs, I think, can go a long way toward increasing the opportunities for all people.
We are looking a lot at how these tech jobs don't require college degree maybe, but require additional training can be an avenue. And I know that at the state level, there's a lot of micro certification programs. I know our Urban League, our jobs and workforce system are all looking at those kind of opportunities to give people the opportunity for those skill sets. Priya, Chris, are you seeing anything in the places that you are or the companies you're working with that's focusing in on advancing the diversity of tech talent?
So
Sorry, go ahead.
go ahead, Priya. I'm sorry.
Yeah, definitely. So I think what we're doing is, or what I'm seeing is that a lot of senior leaders are focused on that issue, right? The first one we all understand. You know, a lot of changes happen in the U.S. and and I would say, you know, just sort of the awareness has been changed about diversity and the need for diversity and for supporting it. So I think we're definitely seeing the leadership down, the support in companies. There might have been a situation where there were less programs. Definitely seen that during this time in our company, we used to have, you know, like a certain specialty diversity groups, but then we've expanded that beyond. So I'm definitely seeing that in other companies as well. And if it's not there, I think the people themselves, like Randy mentioned, right? He's doing it. So people are standing up and they're taking charge and ownership, and they're wanting to do that. And similarly, on the learning front, what I'm seeing is that since people were not traveling anywhere to conferences, to seminars, doing certification, all that, right? So everything is online. A lot of it has become driven by how much time do you have. I spoke to a company recently, and the lady said, you know, she said that her entire team, and this was an operation team, they finished their learning for 2 years last year.
Nothing else to learn for the next 2 years. They're done, right?
So
Yeah.
they essentially covered, they had so much time, they said, and the volume on the work was less, but they had enough time to cover it for 2 years. I, in fact, also used up the time that I had at hand last year to go way past what my learning hours need to be for this year. So I
All
don't
those continuing education credits are done for you, huh? That's good.
so I'm done. But then very similarly, I am giving back in teaching people. So I've picked few skills that I like to, you know, have sessions. So I do that very well. So there are many avenues where you can actually receive, but then also if you think you want to be good in something, you can give back. I would encourage people and companies to explore those options.
Chris, you had something you wanted to add here too?
Yeah, just quickly, I was just going to say, as it relates to diversity, and particularly in technology, but in professional services in general, one of the things that it's a priority for us, diversity and inclusion this year, especially. But what we've really done is we've taken it to the level where we, you know, in terms of our diversity strategy, is to go to universities where they have more of a diverse population of students and do a lot of recruiting there. And so we try to encourage companies to, in our HR consulting business, to, you know, to go to the places where, and I like kind of what Randy's saying there, that thirst for knowledge is there across diverse groups of people. And that's been working really, really well for us. And the way we view diversity at Sickage, Steve, really is, you know, we're blind to color and to race and religion and all those things. The way I look at diversity is more about diversity of thought. And so how do you get diversity of thought? You can't have a bunch of people that have the same backgrounds, that come from the same place, the same walk in life, right? That doesn't give them diverse thought. They'll think like everybody else does. So we really think about it, and particularly as it relates to our tech business, is we want to get people with diversity of thought. And that means they've had different experiences than you and I have had, or than the next person has had, right? So blind to everything else, with that concept, and going into these universities where you're going to find that cross-sectional mix of diversity in the student base. So that's something that's been working really well for us, and it's a big push for us, and it has to be. You know, if you don't make it a priority, it won't be one, right? So
no, that makes sense. So as we think about moving towards an economy that's going to require everyone to know more in this space, do we think everyone has to become a technology expert? Do attorneys and accountants and sales professionals need to develop a really deep secondary skill set in advanced technology so they can add value without relying on, you know, got to ask the IT guy about that?
I'll jump on that real quick. I would say no, but I think leaders in businesses, more than anything, they have to be able to be communicators that can drive organizational change at the end of the day. And then instead you hire experts. And again, I think this whole concept around transforming a business in any respect is all about talent. And so one thing I know for sure is you won't guarantee success by bringing in talented people, but you certainly have a much better chance of not having huge failures, right? Yep. So I don't think everybody has to be experts, and you can't be anyway. It's just impossible to be. But you got to find those experts that have good people skills that can work together in an organization that can actually make change happen. And I think it's incumbent upon the leaders to be able to articulate that vision to everybody within the organization, that this is why this is happening, and these are the likely outcomes, the benefits of. And I think that's what I think you have to be willing to go out and bring those really smart, talented people in that do have the expertise that Priya has, that Randy has, and others, to be able to successfully, employ these strategies. Otherwise, it isn't going to happen, and it's not going to be successful.
So here's a great question, maybe one that, as we close up here, is a good way to sort of think, what's one idea in digital transformation that's sort of in one of those deep, dark back corners of your mind that you might not hear other people discussing, but you think might develop into something big in the future? So what is it that nobody's really talking about enough right now, but you think, boy, this is something that we're keeping an eye on for our business?
That's intellectual property, Steve. I can't disclose that.
I want somebody to bite. Come on. What are those things that we just need to be talking about more that we're not?
I'll take, and I think this is already starting to happen, right? So I won't share one idea. I'll probably share a few ideas, which to me, have already sort of arrived or will arrive in a big way. For sure, we're seeing telehealth, right? So telehealth, like, how do you sort of talk to your doctor? How do you talk to your nurses? How do you get your medicine? That has definitely undergone change. It will continue to change and evolve, especially for, seniors, people critically ill. The other thing that I've completely adopted is wellness, like how am I sort of taking classes? How am I doing things? That itself, I think I like the change. I like the convenience of my home and be able to still attend and be able to, have access to good teachers and, health professionals. And I think education, like, I'm seeing a drastic shift in how education is going to be disbursed. Religion, we all went for meetings and things like that, attended and got together with people. So I think those changes, some of them are actually going to stay. People will go back and do things that will be welcome, but some of it is prime time.
I would say, I was going to say, Steve, and this may not be all that popular, but as it relates to in our world, it's particularly, I think that remote working is the future. Quite candidly, as companies look at and really examine the work that their people do and the value that the business gets from that work, meaning how that value is recognized or realized from a client, from a product, from a widget, whatever it is, that's going to, they'll take a hard look at that. And I think remote working, I think everybody will work remote before too long. And I don't think it's going to be very long, actually. That the technology is there for people to do that. But even if you take a deeper dive into what does that really mean? What's the value of that individual working in some place other than where they've historically worked? And that's hard to wrap your mind around. Leaders are looking at that going, yeah, but they have to do that because they've got this thing they need to do with this machine or whatever it is. Well, not so much, not so much. So I think And then of course that changes the dynamic of our society really, if that happens, because you have wealth transfers from, urban areas to suburban. You have all kinds of economic impact from that on a macro level, which I think is really interesting to me. And all the while productivity will keep going up. And that's the thing that's pretty exciting about it. So it's not to say that there is an opportunity. There's a ton of opportunity as we become more tech enabled as a nation, particularly here in the United States, and the growth that we're going to see as a result of that.
That's good stuff, Chris.
I have
Randy,
one thing to add.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. So I think one of the areas of digital transformation that still has a long way to go and a whole lot of promise, that I think a lot of people can almost see and touch but don't know quite how to action on, is the technology that allows us to connect as human beings better when we are not physically in the same space. I think all of us, we're kind of aware of, these collaboration technologies, the digital whiteboards that Priya was talking about, the meetings with video, the, more esoteric virtual reality or augmented reality solutions. And all of them, if we're honest, feel a little clunky right now, right? Like, we have this great desire to have these connections, to collaborate with people, and even just to be with people in a social way, that has become a lot more difficult.
Yep.
And there are so many opportunities for people who can figure that out. And it's going to take a lot of innovation. It's going to take a lot of trial and error, failing fast, and experimenting on a grand scale. But what an opportunity at this time, when you now have more people, orders of magnitude more people who are willing to try these technologies. If you launch something into the market space, and have some kind of a free tier for people to experience it, you could get something that surprisingly takes off. And I think whoever figures that out is going to have a really strong business that's going to go for a long time.
Second Life will actually be sort of a more usable sort of environment, right?
Yeah, something like that. The
Love
right
it.
version of that we haven't quite figured out yet.
Love it. Well, I think I appreciate the perspectives that you all brought to this and the ideas. Hopefully the folks who have been a part of this call today are going to walk away with 2 or 3 things to think about, some practical ideas. Randy, Priya, Chris, thanks for your time today. We really appreciate you sharing some of your insight and ideas for us. These are all folks that I think if you've got questions or things you want to follow up with, I'm sure they'll be accessible to you. I want to make sure I thank, again, them for their time. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks for having us.
I also would be remiss in not mentioning as well that if you need resources in this space, we will have them on our site. There'll be a recording of this if you want to pass it along to others. Also, check out, we do have a relationship with Binary for some stuff for smaller businesses. If you need some help and assessment, they're making those available to businesses. So you can just see where you are. So you can check those out on our website as well. I'd like to thank again our sponsors for today: Akron Children's Hospital, Browse McDowell, Huntington, Key Bank, Retzel, State and Federal Communications, Cohen and Company, Goodyear, Great Work, Sikich, SumaCare, and Team Neo for making this broadly available today. Thank you all for your support of the work we've been doing. We've got a lot going on over the next couple of weeks. We'd love to have you involved. Later this month, we'll be kickstarting a listening tour of our members and our leaders as we refresh our strategic plan. So if you want to sort of spend a little time getting back together with some people in some small groups, check out on our website and our calendar. Those strategic sessions are listed. You can sign up. They'll be limited to 15 or 20 people at a time. We'll be doing a bunch of them over the next month or two as we think about what's next for the chamber. Also, as we look at July, we are going to be focusing on women in the workplace. We're going to kick off on July 14th with a panel focused on the economic impact of women in the workplace. And on July 27th, we're going to feature a panel of trailblazers as part of our 2021 Women of Achievement Awards. So more information on our speakers for those awards is online on our events calendar. And we appreciate, again, the support we have from our sponsors for those events as well. And they're available to anyone. We encourage you to join us and celebrate some amazing women that we have in our community. With that, I'd say thanks again to our panelists and have a great day, everyone.